Welcome back to the History of Western Civilization, lecture number 2. This is the third and final video of this lecture. So, as you can see on this map right here, we've got Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, with different hotspots of civilizations springing up around river areas. As we've already talked about, the Sumerians, the Amorites, and the Akkadians all popping up in this area between the Tigris and Euphrates River, known as the Mesopotamia, as well as the whole Fertile Crescent, which kind of stretches down on this side in this Syrian Israel area of the coast here on the Mediterranean Sea. We're now actually going to shift over to here, slightly south, to the Nile River, onto the area which is commonly known as Egypt. So, why so much success in this area? Well, for one thing, the river, the Nile, okay? That's the biggest reason right there. The Nile River is extremely long, and it extends back from down here, the Upper Nile, or Upper Egypt, flowing northwards into the Mediterranean, where it exits at the delta here into the Mediterranean Sea, okay? Well, this is also known as Lower Egypt, the northern part, and it's because it's based on the Nile that starts in the south and flows north, so it's kind of the upper area and the lower area based on the river's direction, okay? So, the big thing about why this area is so successful for civilization is because of a couple factors. One being the fact that the Nile regularly flooded. Okay, making harvest certain. More so even than the areas of Mesopotamia, which would flood almost every year like clockwork. This would flood like clockwork every year, every few months. They knew exactly when it was going to flood. It might be a day or so off, but that's about it. It wouldn't be much longer than that. And so they were able to know that when the Nile floods, they would be able to harvest or plant their seeds depending on what time of year based on that, and they would know what crops to grow when and stuff like that. And so the area along the Nile is extremely lush and has a lot of vegetation, while a lot of the areas around it do not. They're desert. And so that's also a major reason for success in Egypt, that these deserts here and here, as well as also the Red Sea, as well as a couple mountains and things like that down in this area, have really made it very good natural boundaries for the people of Egypt to live inside. That an enemy coming from another part of the North Africa or in the Middle East, over by the possibly by the Fertile Crescent, would have to cross huge amounts of desert to get to Egypt itself. And so why would you do that? Well, Egypt is quite important, and because of those natural boundaries, yes, they're protected, but they also do have at times that they get attacked, and we'll talk about one of those later in this video. So, as we said before, the Upper Egypt is where the Nile starts in these lakes down here and actually travels all the way up here to the delta here, where most of Egyptian civilization is really centered around here, but also it moves along this area as well. Okay? One of the reasons that the harvest were so good was because of the aratrum, the scratch plow. And as you can see right here on this banner that of a picture I took in a museum, exhibit for ancient Egypt, we've got farmers, Egyptian farmers, having this animal like a almost like a reindeer or an ibex or something like that, some kind of antelope or deer, pulling, or goat even, pulling a plow called an aratrum, the scratch plow. And what does that look like? Well, here's a much, much better picture of that same large painting and large portrait. And so this is the aratrum, the scratch plow. It is a very weak plow, okay, and it only has like a kind of metal area here, okay. It doesn't go very deep. It only works very loosely in the sandy soil of Egypt and coastal areas around the southern Mediterranean area of Europe when it eventually gets spread elsewhere. But it doesn't really dig deep into the ground. It kind of just scratches along the surface, scratching along the surface of the dirt, kind of up-tilling a couple, maybe an inch or so, maybe a little bit more into the soil, but not very deep. But that's deep enough for certain plants and crops to grow very well. Other crops sometimes like a deeper hole in the dirt to grow. And so that would kind of limit things what the Egyptians could grow in this area. But the scratch plow was a very useful plow that they were able to use. Moving on, during this period also, we end up having several powerful figures start developing during the Archaic period of ancient Egypt. And the Archaic period lasts from 3100 BCE to the year 2770 BCE. Okay, so about 400 or so years, 300 to 400 years. Narmer, pictured right here, is the person that unites the two kingdoms of Egypt, the Upper Kingdom and the Lower Kingdom. They were both individual kingdoms. He ruled originally, I believe, the Upper Kingdom, and then he moved his forces up into northern Egypt, which is the Lower Kingdom, and conquered it and united them into one big nation. Okay? Forming not just Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, but Egypt in general. Narmer also went by the name Menes, and Menes in ancient Egyptian means catfish. And the reason for that was because he had this kind of mustache and beard, which kind of made him look a little bit like a catfish with the big whiskers. He kind of had those big whiskers on the sides there. But he was able to unite ancient Egypt into one kingdom during this Archaic period, which started the Archaic period in 3100 BCE. Well, moving on, a few years after that, and in the 2700s of BCE, we end up having a third dynasty be created under the king Djoser, or Zoser, as it is pronounced. Djoser or Zoser founded the third dynasty, which meant it was the third different family to take over and rule Egypt. And that lasted this Old Kingdom period under his rule, as well as a few other families afterwards, from 2770 BCE to 2200 BCE. The Old Kingdom is commonly known today as the Age of the Pyramids. Why? Because the Egyptians at that time built the pyramids during this period. More so than any other period. Really, during the periods after the Old Kingdom, not as many pyramids, if any, okay, or very few. The first pyramid that was built was the Pyramid of Zoser, okay? Pyramid of him himself. It was built in honor of him, and it was a stepped pyramid, and this is exactly what it looks like outside, and these are people next to it, and this is what it kind of looks like in an artistic rendition, with like an entrance to it, and some larger rooms up inside, and then lots of little tunnel systems for lots of the treasures to be buried with him, where he would be eventually buried down in this area. Okay? And it was a stepped pyramid, meaning what? It looks like it has it's steps or stairs, right? Because that was a very easy way to make a pyramid, okay, is layering stone upon stone upon stone and then having a next level that isn't as big as opposed to directly up, which means more weight on the sides and stuff like this. This is kind of compacting into the middle and stuff like that and spreading out the even stresses. So kings gradually during this period, during the Old Kingdom, started becoming regarded no longer just as a king, like Zoser was, but as a king like the pharaohs, okay? And eventually became known as the pharaohs and titled as a pharaoh. Well, what does pharaoh mean? Well, in many ways it means that they're a child of the gods, okay? And that they are revered as equal as a child of the god, or considered completely to be the children of the gods, that the gods would have children with mortals, and that part mortal beings would be on this earth to rule over the rest of the people. And that was the idea that the Egyptians developed. During this Old Kingdom period, though, there was a lot of peace and prosperity. It was a very peaceful period for these people. Other Egyptian structures built during this time were the Sphinx, as well as a bunch of different columns and other cities and different things like that. And you can see the Great Sphinx of Giza right here in front of several of the pyramids right there, built between the year 2558 BCE and 2532 BCE, which means it took about 26 years or so to build. So, quite a while to build this, and it's kind of this man-looking cat, right? Or kind of like a cat-shaped body with a man's face, with the big kind of pharaoh's hood over it. And yes, it used to have a nose that has since been blown off by the historical French general Napoleon Bonaparte in the 1800s, about 200 years ago from now. And so he defaced it by shooting off its nose with a cannon. But that's another story for another course. Anyway, the Egyptians built quite a lot of structures, as you can see down the Nile area. All these little dots, the red dots are all the different major cities, as well as all these giant different temples and structures and pyramids off to the side in the map. Who built the pyramids? While on the subject of it. Well, who built them? The answer is not aliens. And also the answer is not slaves. A lot of people think slaves built the pyramids. That is simply untrue. In fact, during the Old Kingdom, there were not many slaves in Egypt at all. In fact, the people of Egypt built built the pyramids themselves. Again, they were not slaves. These were the actual farmers during the off-season. In fact, many of them ended up doing it while they were waiting for the rest of their crops to grow. And why did they do this? Well, they did this because they thought that if they got a beautiful pyramid built for their pharaoh, that he would get back into the afterlife, the good afterlife where he was supposed to be destined to go back to be with his family, because he's part God, remember? And so if he was able to do that, everybody that helped participate and build his pyramid with him and also worshipped him would also get to go to the afterlife as well when they passed on. And so that was kind of their religion, of the idea that make sure that the pharaoh is celebrated so that we can also get into their version of heaven or the good afterlife. And so many farmers did so during the off-season. They didn't have a job while they were waiting their crops to grow. They just planted. And when they weren't able to do that, what did they do? Well, they could get another position, maybe job doing something, but that would require a lot of skill. While pyramid building didn't require a huge amount of skill other than from the stonemasons and the engineers that were coming up with the design and overseeing it. But what they did need was laborers to move the giant stones. And so we would end up having large amounts of people, up to about 10,000 at a time, build these pyramids. Okay? And during these periods of building the pyramids, they would actually have competitions where some teams were given different colors or different names, and it would be like, how many stones can you put into the pyramid in the correct place in today's day, okay, before a certain time limit, or even just throughout the whole course of the whole day. And so you end up having that happen during this period. So again, aliens and slaves did not build the pyramids, like people joke about aliens, and people also say that and fully believe that slaves built them, but they were not built by slaves. They were built by farmers, free farmers, as well as other people and professional construction people, okay, during this period. So it's quite interesting that this kind of idea of who built the pyramids and why they were built keeps on persisting, and it's just not true. Some people sometimes think that they were giant grain silos or things like that. They weren't that. These were burial tombs. They were giant grave sites for their leaders, for their pharaohs, and for their royalty, who they revered as gods, okay, as well as celebrations to the gods in general, okay? Modern day pyramids compared to the ancient ones. Well, you've got a couple ancient ones here, like this reddish outline right here is one actually in Mexico, built during around 1000 the year 1000, so about 1,000 years ago. You've got the Pyramid of Zoser right here, the big stepped one. You've got another pyramid right here that's not too far behind it, the Pyramid of the Moon, which is also in Mexico. You've got other pyramids as well here, and then you can kind of see a bunch of different ones, such as the Luxor Las Vegas one, which is the big casino one. You've got different buildings and a big giant hotel in North Korea, which is still under construction even now. You've got the Shard in London, which is this incredible large glass skyscraper building, which was finished in the year 2012. You've got a bunch of different ones, like the one that's in San Francisco, as well as others. And so these are some interesting structures. But as you can see, some of these are built definitely now, but some of those structures, even back then, were quite impressive in size, and were the biggest structures built for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Okay? Some of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Zoser, it was one of the biggest pyramids and one of the biggest buildings ever built for at least 1,000 or so years before another one was built. Well, not necessarily 1,000 to become pyramids, but before other structures built around in other civilizations. So, other Egyptian structures, as we move on in the Old Kingdom period, such as the 5th dynasty, which was around 2400 BCE, there's this kind of door, and I took a picture of this weird, strange door here. And as you can see very closely on this picture, there's lots of writing down along it, and it's kind of this story. And what it is about this pharaoh of Patapsys, which talks about his birth during the 4th dynasty, and then his eventually marriage to a princess when he is getting of age as a teenager, and then he eventually goes off and becomes the king and serves as a king for the 5th dynasty. Okay, he does, and it's talking about his life. Also, what's very interesting about it is the door isn't really a real door. It doesn't open to anywhere. But it's this idea that it kind of looks like a door, and it's kind of a door as his life goes on, moving inwards, and that it eventually, to the end, where it is the afterlife. It is a door to the afterlife, is the idea symbolically about this. This structure right there, which is today in a museum, which I have been to and took that picture. The Old Kingdom, however, started declining with overspending, somewhat because of the pyramids being built, as well as the gold structures and artistic structures inside the pyramids, and hidden away in the rooms, as well as other things like the Sphinx and all that were being built for the kings and pharaohs. And so power started being seized by the provincial governors. The governors of the various parts of Upper and Lower Egypt combined started separating and wanting their own power, and they started kind of overthrowing the pharaohs and the kings. And you had this intermediate period of anarchy and chaos called the First Intermediate Kingdom period, and eventually, soon after that intermediate period ended, you have the Egyptian Middle Kingdom begin in the year 2050 BCE, and that lasts until 1786 BCE, so not all that long. The Middle Kingdom began when a king from Thebes in Upper Egypt took control of Lower Egypt, because again the provincial governors kind of had separated the kingdom into these various tiny little areas. And finally this one king from Thebes takes control of all of it in one go. And this Middle Kingdom becomes another period of greater peace and prosperity again. However, in 1786, bad things happen again, when a bunch of the nobles, again those governor-style nobles, throughout all of Upper and Lower Egypt, start rebelling against the pharaohs, and against the pharaohs to the point where they end up having full-on civil war, and it causes another intermediate period known as the Second Intermediate Period, which stretches from 1786 BCE to 1560 BCE. During this period, an invading force from this region, the Red Sea region, as well as up here, known as the Hyksos, start attacking. Okay, the Hyksos. So let's talk about the Hyksos in just a moment. But also during this intermediate period, though, trade does begin with the people around the Red Sea. Most of the Egyptians are sticking to themselves for the most part because of the deserts and stuff, but they start realizing during the intermediate period, let's go and explore and find out what's on the other side of these deserts, and start exploring and talking with the people around the Red Sea area, okay? And so that's what ends up happening. Well, who are the Hyksos, these foreign invaders? Well, the foreign invaders, the Hyksos, circa around the year 1600 BCE, so slap dab right almost in the middle to close to the end of the Second Intermediate Period. These people bring new tools, including the composite bow. The composite bow, as you can see here, is this kind of bow and arrow, okay, a bow and arrow. You might know what a bow and arrow is. And a composite bow is a very short bow, okay, a compact bow, where it is extremely strong despite its small size, okay? And another invention the Hyksos bring with them is the chariot, where it's this kind of two-wheeled cart, usually for 1 to 2 people. It is driven by, pulled by maybe 2 or 3 horses, sometimes even just 1 horse, sometimes as many as 4 horses, okay? The chariot only has 2 wheels, 1 wheel on either side. Sometimes they would have a blade sticking out of the side, to cut people down as it drove past them, but for the most part it had a driver as well as a person that was usually throwing spears or shooting bow and arrow off of it. The Hyksos, of course, brought with them bronze to Egypt, and Egypt hadn't really had much bronze at this point. Possibly because of lack of resources as well as just overspending with everything else, and not really taking the time to figure out bronze. But the Hyksos brought with them bronze, which caused a lot of issues for the Egyptians. Well, at the end of this conflict around the year 1600 into the year 1560, the Hyksos were eventually defeated by Ahmose the First. Ahmose I. He is the new ruler of Egypt. He ruled from 1549 to 1524, okay, which kind of officially ended the invasion of the Hyksos. He starts what is known as the 18th dynasty, and he unites Egypt into one big nation, and then kind of starts spreading out into other areas in this region up along the Red Sea. He rules from 1549 to 1524. The New Kingdom period is now officially began after the Second Intermediate Period has ended, and even more officially with the final expulsion of the end of the Hyksos people from this area. And it lasts from 1560 to 1087, so 500 or so years is how long the New Kingdom lasts. Well, soon after Ahmose I dies, we end up having Thutmose I. There's another king in between, don't worry about that person, we don't need to know anything about him. But Thutmose I ends up ruling from 1506 to 1493 BCE, and he takes over the area known as Nubia, which is down here, which is part of Africa, as well as a little bit of up here. He also spreads the area of Egypt out into Palestine and Syria, all the way up to the Euphrates and Tigris River. Okay, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers here. So expands the area quite a lot. That huge colored brownish portion is how large Egypt is during the New Kingdom under Thutmose I. And so here's a better picture right here. Nubia is this area right here, as well as a little bit area here, but mostly this area. And so that is most of it. While up there, he and Egypt starts encountering different peoples such as the Assyrians and the Hittites and the Babylonians, which were the former Amorites, as well as the Sumerians, which we'll talk about later on. Lastly, today, I want to talk about Hatshepsut, okay? She was a ruler of Egypt. Well, yes, you heard me correctly. She reigned from 1473 BCE to the year 1458 BCE, and she had a very interesting rule. First, her husband, which was also her brother, was the main ruler, Thutmose II, and was the son of Thutmose I, or grandson. Don't worry about which. But Thutmose I dies, and Thutmose II becomes king. Now, he becomes king very briefly, and she, as his sister and his wife, rules with him. But Thutmose II dies very early of sickness, and so she ascends as the king, as the new ruler, fully by herself, no longer co-ruling with her husband. But she does have a son at this point, which is her son/nephew, because again, she married her brother. Well, Thutmose III is this son/nephew, and is her co-ruler during this period for a brief amount of time. We're not exactly sure how long Thutmose III ruled with her, because he was an infant for a while. Even when he was older, we're not sure how long, because we know that he just kind of disappears from history at this period of time. We don't really have much record of it. But we do know that she is regarded as one of the first ever women pharaohs, if not the first. But even though we know she is a woman, she is depicted in art, not just sculpture, this is a sculpture of her, but also pictures in paintings as a man, because she has a beard in all of these pictures. Now, she was probably just having this in pictures and would maybe wear a fake beard or something like that, because of how the Egyptians regarded beards and things like that as kind of a cultural idea. But she is depicted as a man in paintings, but we do know that she was actually a woman, okay? And she ruled very, very well for the people of Egypt, and very peacefully for quite a while. Within about 2 years of Thutmose II dying, and her co-ruling with Thutmose III, she is now solidly the full-on ruler. And we don't know how long Thutmose III helped rule, but she was the one calling all the shots within about 2 years after 1479. She is portrayed a lot in pictures and sculptures, but again, always with a beard. And she also is buried in the Valley of the Kings, where most of the most famous Egyptians of this period, Egyptian rulers and kings of that period, were buried. And she is buried among them with the greatest honor as what would be expected a great ruler of Egypt. Here's a couple pictures I do want to share with you before ending this video. The goddess Hathor from the 18th dynasty. This is a giant statue. As you can see, these are people next to it. This was also during the New Kingdom. And so this shows you how big some of their art and sculptures were. This was created in the year 1400 B.C.E., give or take. It would have taken a couple years to build. And of course, this is one of their goddesses. And you can see the time and effort that it would have taken to carve this out of stone back then. And again, this was created in the year 1400 B.C.E., which was 3,400 years ago. You've also got a red granite colossus. There's only parts of it that remain today. As you can see, it's beautiful red granite. This is actually my fist next to it, showing you how big the giant fist of it is. And it would have been a statue of the entire person. And this would have been his head and his hat. It was created in the year 1390 BCE, also during the 18th dynasty, around the same period of Goddess Hathor's statue creation. We've got an 18th dynasty sarcophagus, which was inside a pyramid or one of the Valley of the Kings tombs. And as you can see, there's intricate detail writing and carving all over it. And this is another picture of the same sarcophagus right there. And you can see kind of this bird-like animal here stretching out, which we'll get to what that symbol is in another lecture. It's a Zoroastrian symbol. And so next time we will talk about the Rosetta Stone, King Tut, Stonehenge, the Sea Peoples, the origin of the myth of the Minotaur, the Indo-European Language Group, and so much more. So next time.